welcome. This is Downbelow, a role-playing game we are creating in a future that is bright and shiny on the outside and kind of dingy on the inside. I'm Ian.
I'm Steve.
And we're going to go a little bit deeper into the reasons we are doing what we're doing and the designs that spring forth from those reasons in this new series on the inner how and why of Downbelow the RPG.
Indeed, and so the way it's going to take shape is, obviously, we've been doing this as sort of a question-answer thing, so Ian has a question, I'll have an answer, and we're going to go on from there.
Today, Steve, let's talk about why the general setting looks the way it does. The initial pitch that got this setting going was sort of a dystopia that looks like a utopia, or
right.
You actually sort of expressed it to me as a utopia, except you're not playing the people who benefit from it.
Yeah, basically, that came from a very specific want-need space in my head. One of the appeals to dystopias is that it's very easy to identify to the people who oppose those in power. They're in a way, they're a backwards form of fulfillment fantasy. They're a backwards form of empowerment fantasy because it's basically saying we, the disenfranchised, have free reign to struggle against the enfranchised and be cool doing it. And that statement about coolness is something we're going to be revisiting in a couple of episodes, so stay tuned. Anyways, it's basically being a dystopia is an excuse to be a Robin Hood without repercussions. Sure, you can have the repercussions, but it's pretty obvious that the people who are acting against you in a dystopian society are in the wrong.
The people who put those repercussions on you are the bad guys,
right.
So all the repercussions of your anti-society acts become just part of what you're buying into.
So functionally, in your classic Shadowrun, in your classic Cyberpunk, in your William Gibson novels and Walter John Williams novels, the criminal is the hero because the authority is inherently, if not corrupt, flawed. That's what makes it a dystopia. So the thought that always occurs to me, even though I'm in the middle of enjoying all of these things, is always the question of, if it's so flawed that the hero is the villain, or rather the traditional villain, the criminal is the hero, why is everyone focusing so much on tearing down as opposed to changing? And it makes sense for the player characters not to be focused on changing, because government reform is not usually what you think of as role-playing game material. It's probably not what you think of as anime material. It's probably not what you think of as interesting, riveting story material, unless you're into that sort of thing specifically. So...
And while we one day might make a game about that, that's not what we've done here.
Right. But the question is not why aren't the player characters doing this? The question is, why is nobody doing this?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at any cyberpunk fiction, the bulk of energy is invested in keeping the status quo, keeping things the way they are, so that there's a place for the adventures to happen. And if they change, that comes at the climax, the crux of the book. There's rarely anyone working to change it until you get into the climactic home stretch. And that bugged me, that nobody would work on changing it. So what I did in the initial proposal was basically say, here's a reason for nobody working on changing it, because for most people, it doesn't need changing. The bulk of people benefit from this. Unlike classic cyberpunk, where your haves and have-nots are ivory towers versus slums at the feet, this is more widespread. This is one where the disenfranchised are a numerical minority instead of a numerical plurality or majority, as you'll see in some.
And that raises some difficult questions that can be explored in this setting, because in the modern day, we also have some situations where there's a thing that works out okay for the majority of people, but there's a minority of people that it doesn't work out for, and what obligation does the majority of society have to that minority of people? And
it's
that
actually
can be a very interesting story to explore.
It's frequently a very heated debate, because no one will argue that the facts, well, hypothetically, no one will argue that the facts are different than they are, but everyone has a different viewpoint on what is owed to whom by whom. And really, Another thing that I appreciate about this particular sort of setting, where it's a utopia that has major dystopian elements, or possibly a dystopia that is coated in the candy shell of a utopia, depending on how you look at it. In your classic cyberpunk, you root for the bad guys because you're playing the bad guys. This is like your crime thriller where you root for the gang robbing the casino because they're the main characters. In Downbelow, there should be some real ambiguity because both sides are wrong and both sides are right, and it should be very difficult to determine who you're rooting for and why you're rooting for. All you know is that for your characters to progress, they have to survive, and to survive, they have to do questionable things.
And obviously, you're going to start out and spend most of your time as the player characters rooting for yourselves because you're you.
Right.
But that's why one of the big themes in the setting is the player characters not necessarily trying to change the system, but trying to get themselves out of Downbelow and benefit from the system.
So there you have it, in a nutshell, the philosophy behind the utopian dystopia of Downbelow and why we decided to pursue it.
And tomorrow we'll talk about an aspect of the system, and then we will come back to another deeper look into the setting. Thanks for falling through the cracks with us.